Classifying igneous rocks. There are two main things that we look at when classifying igneous rocks. The first is, how did that rock form? And we've already covered, when we talked about the definition of an igneous rock, that you can have both an intrusive or an extrusive igneous rock. Let's look at that in a little more detail. So as we saw, when you have an intrusive igneous rock, the grains are going to be coarse, and we saw that that was due to the fact that these cooled slowly. Since they formed intrusively, that is under Earth's surface, it took longer to cool and solidify. And the result is these larger grains. Well, there's different kinds of intrusive rock. You can have just a general intrusive rock. You could have a porphyry intrusive rock. And here, as you see, the definition is 2 grain sizes. And that is because not all materials solidify at the same rate. So here we're looking at a rock where some of the material, in this case the lighter gray, cooled quickly, and so it's fine-grained, but then other parts cooled slowly, and that gives it a larger grain. So you have a mixture of these materials which at the same temperature cooled and solidified at a different rate, and so you get this rock that has these 2 different grain sizes. You can also get what's called pegmatite, and here your grains are very large, almost crystalline grains. And when you see that, you know that you are dealing with a rock that falls into the category of a pegmatite. Extrusive, we know, forms above ground, and because of that, it cools quickly, and that results in a fine grain. Well, just like intrusive, we have different versions of extrusive rock beyond just a generic extrusive. You can get air bubbles, and if that's the case, then you get what's called a vesicular extrusive igneous rock. So here we have a picture of pumice, which you may associate with scrubbing yourself in the bathtub. It's the same thing, and all these little holes here are air pockets. Pumice, because it has so many air pockets, actually has a density less than water, and it's one of the few rocks that does have such a low density, which allows it to float on water. Another example of an extrusive rock is if it cools very fast. Then it gets a texture that is glassy. And here's a lovely example of a glassy extrusive rock. This is obsidian. And so you get this very smooth texture. It does feel like glass. So essentially almost no grain at all. So that's classifying based on how it formed. We can also classify based upon what it is made of. So when classifying by composition, we're basically going to be looking at a percentage of silicates versus metals. Now recall with the minerals, if there's a high metal content, it's ferromagnesian, and if it's a high silicate content, it's non-ferromagnesian. So essentially we are looking at rocks that either were formed out of a lot of non-ferromagnesians or quite a bit of ferromagnesian mineral. So our first category is granitic, and as the name implies, granite does count as a granitic igneous rock. This is a picture of granite. And granite has a very high silica content. So we're looking at not much metal, but a lot of the silicates. So because it does not have a lot of metal, we get lighter colors, whites and pinks. So here in the granite you see a lot of pink. Often you'll see a lot of white as well in granitic rocks and in granite in particular. So granitic, you're looking at lighter colors, not much metals present. Andesitic, we're looking at almost half and half of silicate material and metallic material. And color-wise, you're going to see this mixture of dark and light. So here we see a nice example. This is diorite, which has this mixture of dark spots and light spots, fairly evenly mixed between the two. And then our last category is basaltic. So this is going to have a high metal content. So this is going to have more iron and magnesium present. And as the name implies, basalt is an example. This is basalt. So here, of course, darker colors. So these are going to look more black, brown, and remember green counts as a dark color. So all of those would fall into the basaltic category. And here we're just seeing kind of the general way of classifying. So we can look at, again, how it was formed. And so we look at the grain size. Coarse-grained, of course, we know it's intrusive. Well, you can have intrusive granitic, intrusive andesitic, or intrusive basaltic. And then you can have extrusive equivalents, where they are fine-grained. So granite, if it forms above ground, is going to be rhyolite. Diorite tends to go by the same name either way. Gabbro, if it forms on the surface, is basalt. We saw pumice as a nice example of an vesicular igneous rock. Pumice is very light in color, so we know that's granitic. Scoria is higher in metal, so it's going to be basaltic, but it too has air bubbles in it, so it is extrusive. Obsidian, very dark in color, so we know that's basaltic, but very glassy, so we know that's extrusive. And 2-grain size, we can look at granite porphyry as an example of 2-grain sizes. Pegmatic, appropriately enough named pegmatite, is an example of a pegmatic or very coarse-grained igneous rock, and that tends to be very light in color, so that would also be granitic. So this is how we classify igneous rocks.